Hello, and welcome to another installment of Nightmare Masterclass. My name is David Stockdale. I'll be your host on this excursion into the dark unknown. This is the second video of a multi-part analysis in which I discuss the mysterious web series Petscop. Needless to say, if you haven't seen the series itself, that would be the logical starting point. But be warned, this web series goes to some uncomfortable and, at times, downright disturbing places. So if you're not in the right emotional state for that sort of thing, you should probably sit this one out. In the previous installment, I covered videos 1 through 3. In this installment, I'll be going over videos 4 through 6. So if you haven't seen my first video, please watch it in its entirety prior to checking out this one. Having said that, let's get started. Video 4 was uploaded on April 7th, 2017. It is notably shorter than previous videos. Paul admits to having failed at explaining a certain aspect of the game, though it's not entirely clear what he's talking about. Paul walks down a pathway and up a flight of stairs. He returns to the darkened field and shows the viewer an object he's recently found. Paul speculates that the object is a camera. It's pointing in the direction of some kind of platform. Paul explains that the area where this object is located roughly lines up with the area downstairs where he was shown the windmill in video 2. Footnote. Despite Paul having said that he previously attempted to demonstrate this, to my knowledge, we've seen no such attempt. So, at this point, it's safe to say that we are missing footage. And considering that these videos have clearly been edited, it is likely that the instance Paul is referring to has not been made available for us to view. At the beginning of the video, Paul says,
"So if you remember what I was trying to explain yesterday."
Up until this point, I had assumed these edits were done by Paul for the viewer's convenience. But this is a little different. There's some dissonance here. Paul is speaking as though we've seen his previous attempt to explain the whole situation vis-a-vis the windmill, but we haven't. Moreover, he says, quote, yesterday, but the previous video was uploaded on April 2nd. It seems as though Paul is having a real-time exchange with someone, and we're not really meant to be a part of that exchange. So this raises an integral question. Is Paul the one editing these videos? Is he the one uploading these videos to YouTube? Or is it someone else? Back to the video. Paul goes on to speculate that this platform is a placeholder for the windmill itself. At this point, Paul acknowledges that he's missing something. Footnote. Paul's instincts are entirely correct. He is missing something. Do you see that movement in the upper right-hand portion of the screen? It's easy to miss. Let me play it back. Are you still having trouble? Okay. I've tinted the video a lighter shade of blue to better illuminate exactly what's happening. Take a look. Yeah, that's another character walking around there. It appears to be mirroring Paul's actions. Well, if you take a closer look, you'll see that it's not actually tracking Paul's movements. Paul is tracking its movements. The mysterious avatar is ever so slightly ahead of Paul. So what do we make of this? Hang in there. We'll revisit this later. That wraps it up for the breakdown of video 4. Video 5 was uploaded on April 11th, 2017. Paul starts off the video by revisiting the large pointed object. He explains that he spent some time asking it questions. Now, most of the time, these questions yield the same exact response. I don't know. Paul assumes that this is the default answer when he asks something that doesn't conform to the parameters of the game. However, 4 questions produce distinct answers. Paul asks, who is Tiara? And the object returns with, Petscop kid, very smart. He then asks, who am I? And the object says, Newmaker. Interestingly, the text bounces upwards, just out of view when he asks this question. Footnote. Petscop includes numerous references to the following terms: Newmaker, Quitter's Room, Tiara, and, quote, rebirthing. When considered in conjunction, it is apparent that the series is alluding to the story of Candace Newmaker. The following is footage from a session in the U.S. House of Representatives, in which Representative Sue Myrick explains what happened to Candace.
I do come in support of H.Con. Res. 435, the Candace Newmaker Resolution of 2002. I introduced this resolution in July to honor a little girl from North Carolina who lost her life tragically because of voodoo science called rebirthing. She was a beautiful 10-year-old girl, her whole life ahead of her, and she died tragically in April of 2000 because she was forced to take part in a rebirthing therapy session. Candace had been adopted out of the foster care system by a single woman, and like any child would, she missed her parents and her siblings, and her adoptive mother claimed that she and Candace were not bonding properly. Well, while searching the internet for help, Candace's adoptive mother discovered reactive attachment therapy. It's a disorder treatment, a clinical term for what folks see as a child's ability to bond with new adoptive parents. A therapist who never even met Candace diagnosed her with the disorder, and her mother took her to Colorado for treatment. A radical attachment disorder therapist was paid $7,000 for a 2-week course of treatment for Candace. This was not a licensed psychiatrist or a licensed psychologist. The supposed therapist's highest degree was a master's in social work. After a few days of other attachment therapy, the therapist thought that Candace was ready for the rebirthing therapy. This was supposed to simulate Candace's trip through the birth canal and would symbolically deliver her to her adoptive mother and erase her natural birth 10 years ago. The therapist and her assistant, along with 2 other helpers, wrapped Candace tightly in a flannel blanket and covered her with 8 cushions. Then the 4 adults put their combined weight of 673 pounds on Candace's 70-pound body, bounced on her and squeezed her to simulate contractions. During the 70-minute procedure, the adults taunted Candace to try to fight her way out of the cocoon. 10 minutes into the procedure, Candace begged to be let out because she could not breathe. Her sobs and her pleas were ignored, and she was even told to go ahead and die by the therapist. Candace continued to cry for her life for 30 more minutes. 40 minutes into the procedure, she spoke her last word, no. The adults continued to sit on her and taunt her for 30 more minutes. When they finally unwrapped Candace, she was dead. Her adoptive mother had witnessed the entire episode, and the therapist had even videotaped the procedure, which was used against her in a court of law. She and her assistant were convicted of reckless child abuse resulting in death and were sentenced to 16 years each. Colorado has since passed a law to outlaw this horrendous practice, and other states, including my state of North Carolina, will hopefully do so soon. The resolution I introduced, H.Con. Res. 435, would express the sense of Congress that this rebirthing therapy is dangerous and should be prohibited. This therapeutic technique is not recognized by any professional psychological groups, and many have specifically denounced the practice, including the American Psychological Association, the American Psychiatric Association, the Judge David Bazelon Center for Mental Health, and the National Council for Adoption. And I encourage all states to outlaw this voodoo science and prevent another tragedy from happening. Candace's grandparents, David and Mary Davis, who are my constituents and who are here today, have been tireless advocates for outlawing this procedure. They don't want their granddaughter to have died in vain. I ask my colleagues to join me in passing this resolution to ensure states to outlaw this procedure. And Mr. Speaker, I thank you and yield back the balance of my time.
The Candace Newmaker Resolution of 2002 encouraged each state to pass a law prohibiting the technique known as rebirthing. It is rather clear to me at this point that Petscop, the work itself, is explicitly alluding to Newmaker's story. Recall that rebirthing was previously mentioned in video 3 on the note in CARES room. It read, according to Tiara, young people can be psychologically damaged beyond rebirthing. Tellingly, Candace's original name was Candace Tiara Elmore prior to her adoption, and as stated, the rebirthing session that resulted in Candace Newmaker's death was filmed. A transcript of the session is available online. I'll have a link in the description, but please keep in mind that it is very difficult to read. Notably, the therapists taunt Newmaker throughout the session. Towards the end of the session, presumably when Newmaker stops moving, they repeatedly call her a quitter for not having completed the process. It would appear that Quitter's Room is an explicit reference to this, and as a result of this association, the question, "Do you remember being born?" is given some majorly ominous connotations. So, why does Petscop include an allusion to the story of Candace Newmaker? That's an important question, and it's one I'll be revisiting in the third portion of my Petscop analysis. But before moving on, I want to emphasize something. This is a real thing that happened. What was done to Candace was an absolutely monstrous thing, and the underlying tragedy of the whole situation is something that we should respect. It shouldn't be trivialized. Having said that, I don't believe that's what's happening in Petscop. The work doesn't treat the death of Candace Newmaker as a trivial plot device. On the contrary, the work is calling attention to an important issue, the mistreatment and abuse of children. And there's much more to say about that topic. I'll be getting into this aspect of Petscop a little more in my third video, but I just wanted to make mention of it here. Back to the video. Paul asks, "Where am I?" Again, the text bounces upwards, and the object answers, "Under the Newmaker plane." Footnote. All right, one more thing. So it would appear that the so-called Newmaker plane is the darkened field where Paul initially found the door leading to the lower level. We've got a name for this area now. Recall that this Newmaker plane is the same place where Paul found the platform that he suspects to be a placeholder for the windmill in video 4. And notably, it's the place where we spotted that mysterious avatar, whose movements appeared to track just ahead of Paul. Now, recall that line from the note in video 3. They come out crying into their hands, because nobody will love them. Not ever again. Nobody loves me. They wander the Newmaker plane. Was this mysterious character just another lost soul? A broken child doomed to wander the Newmaker plane? As stated in video 3, is it perhaps a foreboding indication of Paul's fate? Is he traversing a predetermined path? Is it one that others have previously traversed? Okay, back to the video. Paul explains that he previously asked, "Who are you?" But before he's able to show us the answer, the object turns a bright purplish color. Evidently, this is something Paul hasn't seen before, and he can't account for what has caused this sudden change. Paul asks the purple object, "Who are you?" After a moment of hesitation, it returns with an ominous message, written entirely in capital letters. "Turn off PlayStation." Paul notes that this message did not appear previously when he asked the red object the very same question. He asks his new purple friend why he should turn off the PlayStation. Paul laughs nervously. It comes back with, "Marvin picks up tool, hurts me when PlayStation is on." This fucking game, Paul says. At this point, Paul sounds like he's both intrigued and a little frightened. Paul goes to ask another question, and the prompt suddenly turns back to red again. He asks, "Who are you?" The object returns with the very same answer Paul allegedly saw when he previously asked this question. Tool. The word corresponds with a symbol that looks just like the object in question. From this point forward, we'll refer to this mysterious object as the tool. Footnote. Both Paul's avatar and the text circling around the object become distorted for a few seconds during this part of the video. Take a look for yourself. So, at this point, the tool has been alluded to as an object used to inflict pain. Remember, the purple object said, "Marvin picks up tool, hurts me when PlayStation is on." And as it just so happens, Paul's avatar looks to be horrifically mutilated for a moment when the word tool is circling around the object. Back to the video. Paul explains that he's going to stop the recording here. However, an additional scene plays out in total silence. Recall that backwards message in Quitter's Room. It said, "Do you remember being born?" Someone, presumably Paul, asks the tool that very same question. In a somewhat quizzical turn of events, the tool says, I'm not Tiara. Footnote. Let's take note of the lengthy video description in this one. The description lists all of the questions that were asked, along with their respective responses. Again, most of the questions resulted in a default answer of I don't know from the tool. But here's a curious line. The beginning of the description reads, I guess this is for all of you now. So, what's changed between videos 4 and 5? Why is this for all of us now? All right, let's take a break from the videos for a minute to talk about the character design in Petscop. For brevity's sake, we're going to focus on one character, Paul's avatar. Now, if you're anything like me, I'm sure you've wondered at various points throughout this viewing experience what exactly this thing is supposed to be. I'm going to just say up front that I have no idea. But here's something that I think is worth mentioning. The appearance of Paul's avatar works in some ways to subvert a number of standard conventions when it comes to character design in video games. Now, I'll demonstrate this by going over a couple of relevant design aspects. And I'll just preface this by saying that I'm not a game designer, so what you're getting here is the perspective of a layperson. Let's compare this enigmatic creature to a few of the most iconic video game characters in history: Sonic the Hedgehog, Mario, and Link from the Legend of Zelda series. These characters were created to be instantly recognizable, and they've been largely successful in that regard. I'm using iterations of these characters that are roughly analogous with respect to the generation of games from which Petscop purportedly originates. As such, I think this comparison is fair. First, let's talk about color. Color is an important aspect of the Petscop series. This is true with regards to the design of this fictional video game, but it's also an important thing in terms of the overarching plot. Despite this, Paul's avatar has a distinctly muted color palette. Now, you can see here that these iconic characters appear in bright colors, ones that tend to draw the eye to the character against any number of backgrounds. Sonic's central colors is spiffy cobalt blue, Mario's is red, and Link's is a vibrant forest green. In comparison, Paul's avatar is looking quite bleak. I mean, the predominant color in his palette is like puke green. That's a telling choice, and it's one that creates a specific effect. It signals to the viewer that Petscop is not your run-of-the-mill game. It's an anomaly. The central character is not a hero per se, but rather a grim curiosity. The mere fact that there is contention over what sort of creature Paul's avatar really is also works in service of this effect. As a result of certain rather clever design choices, there is an ominous sort of ambiguity to his character. For instance, note that the other characters on screen have relatively large eyes in proportion to the rest of their bodies. This is a common design conceit that helps the player identify with the character in question. People tend to like characters with large eyes. It's an endearing trait. Conversely, Paul's avatar has small, sunken eyes relative to these iconic characters. He doesn't even have pupils. And as a result, it's difficult for the viewer to connect with the character on screen. Not to mention the fact that we are a few levels removed from the actual gameplay, but I digress. The point is that, again, the very design of Paul's avatar subverts a number of standard conventions in video games. In a subtle yet profound manner, these aesthetic choices work in service of evoking both mystery and horror as the series plays out. Can you think of any other design elements that work in service of this? On to the next video. Video 6 was uploaded on April 20th, 2017. There is no video description. It starts with a shot of the windmill and 2 sequential booming noises. 2 hours and 39 minutes later, the windmill starts turning in the reverse direction. It's going counterclockwise, whereas previously it had been going clockwise. And here's where things get really interesting. A shadowy figure emerges from the windmill. It wanders around, presumably in front of the camera Paul found in the 4th video. Is this the character we previously observed in video 4? The camera angle seems to rotate, giving us a view of the darkened fields we've come to associate with the so-called Newmaker plane. Then we get a shot of a dark circle against a light pink background, and there's a pink hole in the middle of the circle, giving it the appearance of an eye. The shadowy figure seems to have a message for us. It arranges a series of blocks to convey a question: where is my house? After this, a small approximation of the greenhouse we previously saw in video 2 gradually constructs itself out of thin air. Things get a little disjointed from here. We see a silhouette of some farm equipment. Hey, that looks familiar. In addition, there's that same lamp we've seen continuously in various bedrooms generated by the painting. And there's a gift foisted up by a support beam. That's also a familiar image. The pet known as Toneth appears, and as blocks are spelling out a new message, a brick edifice is constructed in the background. This is reminiscent of the brick building we previously saw in video 2. One presumes the blocks are spelling out the school, though due to the aspect ratio, the letter L is cut off. So the full message reads, "Where's the school?" The building comes down and the blocks spell out another message: "I will follow." The silhouetted figure leaves. The camera turns back to the windmill, and we cut to 1 hour and 24 minutes later. The windmill mysteriously disappears. Footnote. Just a reminder here, recall that just as Paul was walking away from the so-called tool in video 2, a message appeared. It implored him to, quote, keep watching the windmill. So what we've just witnessed is presumably a result of Paul watching the windmill, just as he was directed to do in video 2. Paul takes direction well, doesn't he? This game is beginning to look like a major investment of time on his part. Back to the video. Paul explains that he had to parse 4 hours of footage in order to find the eventful bits. At this point, he confirms something we've already seen. He notes that for one half of the video, the windmill was going in one direction, clockwise, while in the other half, it was going in the other direction, counterclockwise. Paul makes his way back to the Newmaker plane, and he notices that the camera is now red. He also notes that the height has been adjusted. Paul explains that he's seen the camera at this height before, but he can't account for why it changes. Interestingly, the blocks remain behind the camera, along with Toneth. Paul catches Toneth and reviews the pet's description: a bird. I think I forgot what birds look like. Funny, stupid blob monster, says Mike. That's what it is. Painter. Painting puzzle. Catch Randus first? Has broken leg for some reason. I already hung him on a wall. Too late to take it back. It makes me think about the dog, actually. Because when the car hit him, I thought, at least it will be over soon. The text trails off the description area from here. He survived it, and I was the only one who still wanted to put him down. A dog is an innocent. When that dog wags its tail and appears happy, it's not real. I guess that's Toneth then. Toneth, 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 Toneth. And that repeats for 17 times. The end. It's yucky outside. Footnote. So, what the hell do we make of this description? Well, there are a few things I'd like to point out. It should be noted that the speaker in this description adopts a tone that is like no other description we've seen thus far. It's a tone marked by an empty sort of nihilism. And then there's the whole situation with the dog getting hit by a car. Recall the moment in video 2 in which a car passed by Paul without him noticing. I think this part of the game is a representation of the event discussed in Toneth's description. We'll circle back to this in my next video. There's one rather unsettling line in this description that I'd like to call attention to. When that dog wags its tail and it appears happy, it's not real. I believe the person who wrote this description is projecting their own psychological state onto the dog. They are forced to put on a happy face, while inside they are anything but happy. This passage, or at least part of it, sounds like it was written by a person in the throes of a deep, all-encompassing sort of depression. The speaker refuses to believe the dog could ever be happy because they themselves do not see the potential for happiness in life. They've ruled it out as a possibility. I want you to think about how Paul might be ruling out a few important possibilities due to his own perception. Back to the video. Paul discovers that his inventory now has a few additional fields. They contain silhouettes with images analogous to the diagram Paul saw in the second video. Paul recognizes the shapes, but there's also a totally blank field as well. And there's a message in the start menu. Have you found anything weird lately? There is much to find in this place. Paul calls attention to a certain option in the start menu, Book of Baby Names. It is not accessible. He assumes that the game was meant to have an option to name your pets. Yet, if this were the case, wouldn't the field say something along the lines of Book of Pet Names? Why does it say Book of Baby Names? He goes back to the tool and asks, "Where is my house?" It responds, "You'll never go home." He asks, "Where's the school?" The tool responds, "You can't go back in time." At this point, Paul begins to speculate that the game was designed to make it seem like it's inhabited by an entity or some kind of artificial intelligence. But Paul is skeptical of this possibility. He plainly states that if the game were really haunted or inhabited by some sentient being, there would be a real-time sort of back-and-forth interaction. And as of yet, that hasn't really happened. Paul explains that in an effort to further explore the machinations of the game, he created a new file and started from the very beginning. And tellingly, none of the same sorts of anomalies occurred in this new game. Paul's employment of the scientific method in the story seems, at face value, to lend a sort of reliable quality to his character. His scientific rigor operates as a check against any potential misjudgments we may have vis-a-vis the way the game works. This, I think, is a little misleading. It gives viewers the sense that Paul is reliable and that his conclusions are sound. Yet, there's no way to really determine this from the viewer's standpoint. So, purportedly, he started up a new game, and none of the same sorts of anomalies have occurred in said game. What does Paul make of this information? He writes it off as benign, just as he's written off a few other events as mere coincidences throughout the series. He says, "The game doesn't seem to care whether or not you notice things." That's a rather strange way to frame this recent finding, isn't it? After all, Paul is ascribing intentionality to the game itself. It, quote, "doesn't seem to care." End quote. Now, it's likely that he means to say that the game is programmed such that anomalies are set to occur at seemingly random times, and as such, the player might well miss important events. That would be a rational hypothesis, but he doesn't articulate it that way. Instead, he says, quote, "The game doesn't seem to care." End quote. Paul is telegraphing to us, the audience, something he's internalized without even realizing it. It seems that the game is fucking haunted. Paul doesn't explicitly acknowledge that he feels this way, but his word choice makes it clear enough that he's beginning to have his suspicions. Whether or not the game actually cares about the player's experience, Paul speaks as though it has the capacity to do so. Now, in my previous video, I made the argument that Petscop works as a meta-commentary on both creepypasta as a genre, as well as the Let's Play format. Certain narrative and design elements in Petscop work in juxtaposition to subvert the conventions of both medium and genre in a way that services the overall story. But I previously failed to mention that Petscop can also be thought of as a commentary on the video game experience itself. You see, by virtue of the way the game is designed, Paul is subtly conditioned to move forward. He collects GIFs and comes to associate the visuals and sound effects relating to GIFs as a positive thing. This is understandable considering that Paul finds GIFs in new portions of the game, and these incidences often coincide with the satisfaction of his own intellectual curiosity. Petscop rewards Paul by giving him new information in a piecemeal fashion. In the process, we the audience are rewarded as well, but not once in the gameplay are these incentives explicitly noticed or questioned by our protagonist. The game implicitly privileges information over everything else. The game even manipulates Paul into keeping his system on for over 4 hours while he's watching the windmill. And yet, if we're to take the message in video 5 at face value, as long as the PlayStation is on, someone is getting hurt. Paul compulsively plays through the game, never stopping to consider the potential consequences of his actions. In turn, we compulsively watch the videos, and we eagerly await new material. The game is conditioning Paul, and in the process, it's also conditioning us. We can think of Paul as a conduit through which we, the audience, receive more information about the game. But as the story progresses, it gradually becomes clear that something is horribly amiss. Nonetheless, both Paul and we the viewers need to continue. We're hooked. I just want to make a few things clear before wrapping up this installment. First off, there have been a number of game jacking attempts, and said attempts have been plaguing the Petscop subreddit as of late. Basically, people are trying to assume the role of the creator by posting bogus puzzles and screenshots from the game. Now, there's a reason game jacking is generally frowned upon. It just creates arbitrary confusion. I won't do the users in question the favor of mentioning them by name, and I won't be taking the time to discuss the veracity of their work, or should I say, lack thereof. But I do appreciate the efforts of certain Redditors who have thoroughly debunked such material. A few gamejackers have recently come clean, and I appreciate that. But it would have been even better if they, didn't do it in the first place. And for future reference, my personal view is that it is extremely unlikely that legitimate material will be released on a platform other than the Petscop YouTube page, much less a subreddit whose express purpose is to make sense of the series. That would seem to go against what the series is doing. Now, I could be wrong. After all, the note Paul received did allude to a website. There could well be a corresponding website that no one as of yet has identified. But heed these words, fellow investigators. Anything not released on the official Petscop YouTube channel should be treated with unwavering scrutiny. Nothing I've seen thus far merits further discussion on the topic. So I'll leave it at that. On to another matter. Now, I know you, the viewer, didn't exactly sign up for a lecture when you clicked on this video, but I think this is important. There is an ugly sentiment that I've noticed in certain discussions relating to Petscop. So, just to provide some context, the channel stopped uploading new videos in June. For now, we've got 10 videos in total. That's what we're working with. And we've got no indication whatsoever of when or if new videos will be made available. And for some, that's a little frustrating. Personally, it doesn't bother me. In fact, I think it's exciting. And I feel that the experience thus far has merited my trust in the creator, or creators, plural. I'm not sure how many of them there are. I think we're in good hands, and I suspect there are likely solid narrative reasons for this lapse in releases. Moreover, I think there's plenty of material to go over in the meantime. But I do understand that if you've invested a lot of time into trying to figure out what's going on in this series, this situation might be a little irksome, and that's totally understandable. Here's what I really have a problem with. Some people are getting a little antsy, and they seem to have the feeling that they are entitled to more videos immediately. And for a while now, I've been writing these people off as immature and probably not very experienced with an art project like Petscop. And I don't necessarily blame them for that. The reason I'm bringing it up now is because this entitled attitude that I'm describing is starting to be the dominant view, and I feel there's a need to defend the work. Moreover, some in the community are speculating about the creators in ways that I feel are not very productive. There's a tendency to make certain assumptions with respect to the reason for the lack of new videos. These assumptions are entirely baseless. Yes, it's possible that the reason there aren't more videos is because the creator is finishing production on the next part, but that's neither here nor there. It's pure speculation, and there are many other possibilities that would account for the lapse. Please keep in mind that we know literally nothing about the creators. Now, I just want to note that I don't actually fault anyone for this sort of speculation. It's perfectly normal to be curious about the creators of an enigmatic work such as Petscop, but nonetheless, I don't think it's a productive line of discussion to be talking about what may or may not be the case with respect to the production or the intentions of the creators. It's a pitfall, so try to avoid it. Let's call to mind another mind-blowing project, Allen Tutorial. If you haven't seen it, check it out. I'll have a link to the channel in this video description. The storyline there took place over the course of years. At times, there were gaps in the story that were months long. And in my opinion, those gaps were actually a defining quality of the work itself. In my view, these irregular time intervals, when executed properly, have the ability to heighten the viewing experience in ways that traditional media just can't. When I say a piece of art is successful, what I mean is that elements of the piece are such that it creates a cohesive effect in a way that resonates with me. And with respect to Petscop, I think the case can be made that time is an element of the piece itself. Some people don't seem to see this as a possibility. We'll discuss how the piece deals with time a little more in my third video on the series. But the point here is that the sudden lack of new material is not a mark against the quality of Petscop and may, in fact, be working in service of a broader narrative arc. And well, here's why this bothers me so much. The idea that an artist out there might be discouraged from creating a great work on account of short-sighted people who make uninformed generalizations about the artist and expect immediate gratification. I'm sorry, but the very thought of that is incredibly frustrating to me. I'm not saying that the work should be immune to criticism, but you've got to criticize the work on its own terms. And please, stop framing this project as a commercial product rather than a piece of art. There's a fundamental distinction in the way you discuss these things. I mean, really, some people actually expect this project to have the pacing of a television series. Seriously. I've had discussions with people who argue that Petscop would fail if it aired on TV at the pacing it currently employs, because people will lose interest. If that line of thought isn't self-evidently wrong to you, I don't really know what to say, but let me give it a shot. Hinging the success of a piece of art on metrics such as, quote, audience engagement, which is a horseshit buzzword used by so-called social media gurus, or how well it performs by the standards of an entirely different medium such as television, is an intellectually bankrupt venture. It's certainly true that the project's future could rely on funding from ad revenue generated on YouTube, but that's an entirely different discussion. The fact that people might lose interest within the span of a few months between when the videos are released does not have anything to do with whether or not the work is successful in an artistic sense. All it indicates is that, to state the obvious, some people are impatient. If we hinge the artistic success of a work on its net audience retention over the span of the project's duration, we're judging it on a basis that has more to do with the fickleness of people rather than the work itself. And in my view, that's creating a pretty dismal set of standards. It is my opinion that the people who frame Petscop as a traditional TV series fundamentally misunderstand the work. If you come into this expecting resolution and immediate gratification, you're going to be disappointed. There are no quick and easy answers here. Not everything is entertainment for you to mindlessly consume. I know I've said it before, but it bears repeating here. Some things require time, effort, and work to appreciate. If that doesn't appeal to you, that's totally fine. I understand that not everyone has the luxury of investing time into understanding a project like Petscop. There's no shame in that. But don't judge the work on the basis that the answers aren't being spoon-fed to you. And certainly don't judge it on the basis that it would fail as a television series. Please, I'm begging you, stop advancing this toxic mindset. Okay, well, if you've made it this far, thank you for suffering through my lecture, and my apologies if this was a little tedious for you, but I think it needed to be said. So, winding down, I've talked a lot about Petscop in relation to genre and medium, but I also think it's important to analyze the work from other angles. And as I stated in the first installment, Petscop works masterfully to illuminate the human condition, particularly the lived experience of a child who's experienced abuse. I'll be getting into that aspect of the series a little more in my third installment after I've broken down the remaining videos. That wraps it up for this installment of Nightmare Masterclass. Thank you for watching, and good night.